Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Code and Think. With me today, I've got Brian. Brian is a true technologist. He's got years of experience leading engineering teams. He's mentored engineers and he's helped his clients deliver successful products. He's currently a senior director at McKinsey. Brian, how's it going?
Uh, I'm doing good. Man. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Tell me a bit about yourself. Um, what's your story?
I come from a family where my dad always valued education quite seriously, and that for him was the only thing which you could please him with. It didn't matter what you did. If you did well in school, he was happy. So at a very young age, I actually wanted to be an aeronautical engineer because I saw like pictures of people going to space, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I don't care about anything else. I just want to go to space. I don't know what I'll do when I get there, but I
Yeah.
want to go.
Mm.
And then at some point of my life, when got a bit older, I thought, okay, maybe medicine is what I should do, because everyone around where I grew up in Cameroon. That was like the profession where everyone was revering. It was like if you're a medical doctor, you're on the top of the pinnacle. Um, so I kind of got as something sparked in me to want to do that.
Mm.
But I was not really interested in biology because biology had all these big textbooks of 500 pages, and I just couldn't take it. And maths and physics were some of the things which I really loved. So when I finished high school, I actually then got accepted into engineering at VET.
Mm.
Um, and I was like, okay, that is a career path I want to do, electrical engineering. At that point, I wasn't even thinking software engineering. I was just thinking electrical engineering, being able to work at a power station or being able to do some heavy electrical engineering kind of stuff. Got to vets, started doing electrical engineering, did my undergrad degree, and by some way of luck, when I got to final year, I actually chose courses which could allow me to get into power engineering, or could allow me to get into software engineering. Right,
Yeah.
I still had a bit of options, and I actually met this professor who was I think without the, like you say, mentorship is super important because what tilted me into getting into the software space was this professor I met when I was doing my final year. He's now the vice chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, Professor Chiliji Mawala. And he came and looked at me in the lab and said, "Young man, you're quite hardworking. Do you want to do your graduate studies with me?" And I said, "Why not?" um, and I ended up doing my master's in computational intelligence, building complex models to understand future returns in the stock market, which was quite interesting. I wish I could have kind of made that like an actual end product, and then I'll be
Yeah.
predicting stuff in the stock market. Um, and then fast forward a little bit, then I post my master's, and he's like, look, let's continue on to a PhD. And it had always been my personal ambition that when I grow up, I do not want to still be called Mister. I wanted to be called Doctor. I couldn't be a medical doctor, but I told myself I will be a doctor of some sort.
Yeah.
So when he was like, let's go on this journey of a PhD, I was like, yeah, I'm up for it.
Mm.
So I then did my PhD at Vets University. Completed it in about so I started and completed in about 2.5 years. In 3 years, I was out of it, my PhD. So it was pretty. So I did undergrad to PhD back to back to back to back.
Yeah.
At some point, I had a short stint where I worked for about 6 months, but I told myself because PhD studies was all I knew. Let me just get it out of the way.
Yeah.
I don't know whether if I was working, I would have been able to finish my PhD because I probably would have been like, this thing is too difficult. I've made money. Let me go try and make money. But I didn't know anything else on the other side. And they always say the grass is greener on the other side,
Mm.
right? I wasn't too convinced yet that the grass is indeed greener. So I stayed and did my PhD. And then after that, I started working. First at a software company. It was like a really boutique type software company. We're about 8 people in the organization. and building software for different organizations. And that's where I actually started doing hands-on software work.
Mm.
I spent a few years there and then went to the CSIR, which was quite aligned to my ambitions to use my PhD and do research, right? And there I did stuff where I was leading one of the biometrics research teams. Did some stuff with fingerprint, did some stuff with iris recognition, did some stuff with facial recognition.
Yeah.
And then I thought, you know what, I actually want to get back into software as a discipline, as an actual thing, right? I did one stint at an organization where we were building software for milling plants. So they would set up like the plant for maize milling, converting it to like your pap and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They would set up the machinery, and then we would do the programming of the actual logic units to do the end-to-end flow. So that was something completely different from just writing software to talk to customers. It was writing software to talk to machines, right? So that was awesome. And then I by some means I found myself at ThoughtWorks, and that is a very interesting story. Which it was a point where I was passionate about software. I was passionate about changing the lives of people. That's one thing which, for me, is very key.
Yeah.
And I met a really fantastic lady by the name of Martin Schaffer. And Martin introduced me to ThoughtWorks, met Roy, met Rebecca, and I fell in love with the organization, and that's where I met you. I mean, that's where we got to meet each other at ThoughtWorks. So I spent a fantastic 4.5 to 5 years at ThoughtWorks. Played multiple roles. I was head of technology at some point. I was in the technology advisory board. Went to spend some time in Australia, and I felt like I wanted to come back home after a little while.
Yeah.
And that's where I came back, left ThoughtWorks, spent two stints at some banks in South Africa, and ended up at McKinsey, where I've been for the last 3 years. Yeah. So that's been quite a scenic journey, but yeah, that's me.
It's quite an interesting journey that you've been through, and I imagine that at the point where you are in your career right now, it's you're playing more of the leadership role where you're having to use the softer skills in leading and having all this technological background as well. And as you know, with tech, we continually have to improve on our technology. How do you balance the two? How do you balance the softer skills and the technical side of things?
Look, for me, one of the most important things is you should have the credibility to be able to back what you say.
Yeah.
Right. And this credibility cannot come from you having read a few documents, or you haven't read a few articles, or you haven't played a little bit around with technology, right? And that for me is where the grounding needs to come into place, right? Yeah. I'm a firm believer that I should talk about technology which I know.
Yeah.
So if I'm talking to a CTO, or I'm talking to a CIO, I'm talking to a technology lead, or I'm talking to developers, I should be able to back what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where, for me, the importance of the technology itself comes in. Yes, the soft skills are pretty important, right? Because typically we developers, we just want to say, this is how it's going to be done. This is how it's done, right?
Yeah.
And we don't care what you want, but this is how we feel about it.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not necessarily the way to communicate it, right? It's about making sure that you have some empathy with whoever the other person on the other side is. So if it's a product person, there's a good reason why they may want this done within 2 weeks, right? And it may not be possible to do it within 2 weeks, but maybe there's a part of it that can be delivered within 2 weeks that can still meet what they want. So it's about knowing, how do I put myself in the shoes of this person and think about it from the technology perspective and see what is possible. If really 2 weeks is not possible, how do I then communicate this to the other person, being in their shoes, and say, hey, it's not possible in 2 weeks, but actually we probably could do it in 3 weeks. is there something we could start communicating to whoever your counterparts are, whoever you're facing, to say, give us 1 more week and we will get you what you need to do to get.
Yeah.
But I feel sometimes we come from a premise of it cannot be done. No, it's not possible. Right. So the softer skills are important in actually making sure that you're breaking the barrier between technology and the rest of the entities that support technology. Because at the end of the day, technology is an enabler for business capabilities, right?
Yeah.
Even as a developer, you don't just want to build something that sits there. You want to build something that will be used, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And that's where that's the soft skill element is pretty important on how do you ensure that you're reaching out, you're relating to other people who are not in your sphere, right?
And for you, has that been something that has developed through continually doing over the years, or has there been specific activities that you you you've done to help improve those softer skills?
Yeah, so there's three things. The first one, which I do a lot of, is I read a lot. Last year I went on a mission to do 100 books in a year.
Yeah.
I didn't get to 100, but I got to 80, which was not bad.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking 80 5-page books. I'm talking real books, right?
Yeah.
So I read a lot, and by reading a lot, I get to understand different perspectives, different views, different ways of presenting information, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. The second one is I actually try and take some formal courses whenever it's available. So being in this kind of mindset where if you're in a mindset where you feel you know everything, it's a risky mindset.
Yeah.
There's definitely people who know more in other things. There's things you know really well, but there's things other people know better, right?
Yeah.
So I am a firm believer to go to where the knowledge is and try and get some help from where that knowledge is, right? So that's two. So some formal means. The third one is a mix of coaching, sponsorship, and experience. So I get the people who I am super close to. I've built a relationship with within our firm, who I reach out to and say, hey, how would you present this information? How do I tackle this situation? And so it's very important to have people who you can hinge on, who have more experience than you. They've been there, they've done it, and they've been doing it for many years. To learn from them, like, how would you have done this? Or this is a situation which is likely going to happen. How should I tackle this? And sponsors who actively are looking at, hey, Brian, I noticed that, hey, this you let the guard down on this like that. Maybe next time you could have done X, Y, Z. Because then you start building the muscle, and that becomes a natural thing.
Yeah.
And then you need to then pay it forward, right? You need to start being that person who also identifies and say, and starts looking at others. Like there's quite a number of people in the firm who I do that with, which is, look, man, you should have presented it this, you could have presented this differently in this way. Yeah. Okay, try not to say no, because it comes across as if you're just defensive, Try to position it in this way, like, hey, the complexity, this is the effort and all of that, right?
And what are some of the things that the qualities you look for when you're hiring, and you're looking for new talent? What are some of the qualities that you look for in candidates?
For me, there's two things, two key things, aptitude and attitude. And those two go together, right? Irrespective of how much aptitude you have and knowledge, if you do not have the right attitude, there is a likelihood that you will not succeed, right? Let's say you've got this master technology knowledge on JavaScript, but you don't have the attitude to want to broaden your space. Yes, you become the JavaScript guy, maybe some JavaScript projects, and if your attitude is such that you don't want to collaborate, then no one would want to put you on a project. So you've got this master knowledge, but no one wants to work with you. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
If you do have attitude though, but you do not show aptitude, it's hard, right? So you become that nice guy. Oh, this person is a nice guy. Oh, it's a nice lady. Yeah. But doesn't really capture the basic concepts and the fundamental concepts. So I look at aptitude and I look at attitude. Those are two key things for me. Your path then that has supported you, what have you done in the past? What kind of technologies? Are you a single narrow-minded technologies, or are you looking a bit broader? There's a whole concept of a T-shaped individual, and there's something that's emerging called an E-shaped. But the T-shaped is what is commonly known, where you've got a broad enough knowledge on multiple things, but you've got a depth in one, right? So it's not good enough just to be broad. I know about JavaScript, Java. I know about Rust. I know about Golang. But if you ask me, what have I implemented in any of this? I'm like, yeah, well, I tried this pet project here. No. Tell me you know about Java, Rust, Golang, Nodes. You've got Kubernetes kind of exposure, and you've implemented something in Java, which you can show me, right? Because then that means you've got the depth in Java and you've got the breadth in other languages. It might be database, it might be front end, back end, but there needs to be a depth somewhere.
Yeah, that definitely ties into a topic that I'm passionate about, which is also side projects, right? Because for me, I've seen that with side projects, they give me the opportunity to have that depth. And I know some organizations, they tend to not like when people go about their own projects. But when I look at the times that I've really understood subjects with depth, it is through projects that I start on my own, and I I end up having that in-depth knowledge on the different subjects depending on the language I'm working with. But yeah, so talking about engineers and the work that they do, what are some of the things that you think organizations can do to make the environment conducive for their growth?
I think one of the things which organizations can do is create an environment of innovation. If you have an environment of innovation and that is your cultural fabric as an organization, one, you will attract the right talent, and two, you will retain them, right? If you have a culture of innovation as lip service, you will attract, but you will not retain, right?
Yeah.
So the culture of innovation is got to be embedded in what you do as an organization. It's got to be your bread and butter.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by a culture of innovation? Are you allowing your engineers to experiment? Are you allowing them to be able to fail and learn from them, from their failures, right? Or is it something where it's an organization where, oh my God, no one cannot fail. You cannot not deliver on time. You cannot not, you have to use, when you said you were going to set up this technology, you had to set it up immediately, you know? Or are you letting people say, okay, no, I didn't set it up this time the right way, but I've learned what I did wrong, so that the next time around, when we do the next project, I know exactly what to do to avoid, what are the pitfalls to avoid, right? Because then you are cultivating a learning organization, and a learning organization is then what would keep your people excited. It would keep your people want to be in that organization. You need to invest in people. You know, like for example, we have within the firm, we've carved out. There's a particular number of hours in a year where we say, hey, as someone of a software engineering or cloud guild, you've got X number of hours in a year for yourself and for growing. And we believe that it's your time to use and grow. And no one should be able to tell you what you need to do to get that growth. Right? So you've got protected time where you can go and have a discussion with your project team, with your leadership to say, hey, I'm going to use this time, end of the week, this 4 hours, I'm using it to improve on my capabilities.
Yeah.
Another thing is sponsor people to learn the right things, right? So for example, let's say the latest biggest thing is getting your AWS certifications as a software architect or cloud practitioner. As an organization, are you actively sponsoring your technologies to go do that, right? Are you actually coaching them to go do that? Are you actually mentoring them that they should do this thing so that they can kind of leapfrog a little bit in the industry, right?
Yeah.
So as an organization, have a structure in place to do that, to support that, right? Because if you do that, what keeps me as a technologist who gets excited by the possibility of innovation, what would stop me from staying in that organization? Nothing.
So I know your passion for Africa, and it's one of the things that brought you back.
Yep.
Which is great to know that you're back in the continent and doing great things. What are some of the things that you think are the drivers of technological innovation in Africa?
The beauty about Africa is, I mean, I remember when we used to look at those different articles around Africa over time, the hopeless continent to the continent with the greatest potential to the new frontier.
Yeah.
Africa technologically has also gone through that, where it was almost a dumping ground of technology. But if you look at what is emerging out of Africa now, it's mind blowing. Take Yoko. They've secured a 1 billion investment to grow, right?
Yeah.
Take M-Pesa.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that you can transfer money with a phone that's not a smartphone, right? And there's a lot of these examples around the continent. So it's for me, it's no longer that we are a continent that is trying to adopt technologies. We are starting to be a continent that is thinking about developing technologies outwardly. And we've got a big population, so we've got economies of scale, right?
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the challenges I've seen? Look, talent sometimes is a challenge, right? As you go across the continent, and you might end up having to leverage from other continents. So I think there needs to be a holistic investment in talent. I know some organizations try to do that. How do you train engineers within the continent to serve the rest of the world, right? So I think one thing which we need to figure out as a continent is talent, and maybe we need some investment in some means of some sort. Yeah. So that's one. Two, there is still I feel a bit of reluctance to leverage the modern technologies. And what do I mean by that, right? If you're sitting in some parts of the world, you can spin up a cloud instance of everything you on your estate. Do an automated deployment, like a continuous deployment kind of pipeline, and deliver your software. In Africa, there's still a bit of a, is it legislatively okay? Is there's regulatory constraints in some places around the ability to do that, right? And that's what you start thinking about. Is there a hybrid model where some things we can sit on the cloud and some things can sit on premise because of regulatory constraints? So there's some element of what are the things we can do to enable technology. And also I've spoken, so talent, sometimes regulation, and sometimes also it's just about ensuring that we think big, like, you know, if M-Pesa was trying to be like something in Europe, M-Pesa will not be what it is today. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If Yoko was not thinking about the context of Africa, they probably wouldn't be where they are today. They were just trying to make something that fits like a European market. So let's think big from the context of the continent. So what are the things that can solve the issues of my grandmother who's sitting in the village, or your grandmother who's sitting in some location, or your extended family that's sitting in places where there might not be internet connectivity, which is one of also the constraints in the continent, right? Data is expensive sometimes. Data is prohibitive. So thinking about solutions that cater for the context is super important. And that's why I like the whole concept of the M-Pesa, because with your phone, even if you don't have data, you do star whatever hash, you know, it's not going to consume a lot. It doesn't going to consume a lot, right? Yeah. So it's thinking about the context and thinking about frugality. And I remember we used to talk about frugal innovation a lot when we talk. How are you thinking about the frugality element of technology?
Yeah, yeah. No, I really like that. So, what trends are you seeing that um, likely to gain traction in the years to come in the tech space?
I think there's a lot of cloud, right,
Yeah,
discussions that are happening, and I think it's gonna be something that is leveraged as a way forward. To reduce one your capex spending on infrastructure and make it an opex model, right? Where you use as you need and you shut down as you don't need. That's
yeah.
one.
Mm,
Something else which we've been talking a lot about is the whole shift left concept, which is how do we make sure that things like security we are shifting them left, right?
mm,
We there was a movement to shift quality left.
mm,
And then that's when the whole emergence of like TDD and all of those concepts came in, right? How do you make sure that you're testing early, catching everything early before you get later in the cycle?
yeah,
But what about your non-functional requirements? Or I prefer them as your cross-functional requirements, because when you say non-functional, it makes it look like if it's not
yeah.
functional, why are you doing it? So what about your cross-functional requirements like security?
Mm,
How can you shift them left to? How can you make sure that when a developer is writing code, they're thinking about it from a secure coding perspective?
mm,
When the pipeline is running and thinking about security concerns. So that by the time you get to the end of your cycle and you have to do your penetration testing, it's merely just to validate that indeed your software is ready to be released and not to start fixing security stuff. So that's one thing which is super important. For a long time, infrastructure as code has been getting as gained traction. It's something which people are doing. But I think Terraform has come and done a bit of some good stuff around making sure
yeah.
that you can actually ensure that you actually have infrastructure as code. And I think this is something which should continue, right?
Mm,
Um, for me, I'm less about what technology you use, like using Java or Kotlin and all of that stuff. But there is also the emergence of hybrid type applications, right? So at some point, React Native was something which you find a lot. How do you build once for multiple platforms, right?
yeah.
Um, there's one more which we used in some project called Kotlin multi-platform,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which gives you the ability to build an application which is native like, which has got the native feel,
Mm, mm,
but ensuring that you're building all of your business logic like components of your mobile app in one language, which is Kotlin, and then only building the screen in Swift or Kotlin, depending
mm,
on your screens. And that now starts making you have a feel of native build for a
mm,
multi hybrid application, which is a bit different from what React Native would do, right? Because React Native, then you would have to bridge between JavaScript and the native devices, and then you have to sometimes rely on libraries and things like that.
yeah.
Flutter is also picking up quite significantly, and also I see more and more talk of Flutter, but the whole movement around how do I start building once and reuse and have my different channels served, be it my web, be it my iOS, be it my Android, be it my Windows devices. How do you start ensuring that you have a build once, deploy everywhere kind of methodology, right? So
Yeah.
those are some of the things I've seen which are quite interesting recently, and more people are thinking about that.
Yeah. What do you think about the whole low code or no code movement that is there's been a lot of hype around that lately.
Low code, no code, they do serve a purpose, right?
Yeah.
And they've got their. It's all about context, like, and that's what for me that's a big thing. If you're going to build a very differentiated experience where you want a heavy interaction on your devices and stuff like that, maybe that's not the path to go, right? So
Yeah.
it's all about context. For me, that it's all about context. But one thing which they do give you is the time to market,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Being in a situation like rather than setting up a team that'll come and learn the requirements, and then that's setting up the base framework, and then eventually setting up low code gives you the ability, even as a non-engineer in the purest term of an engineer,
yeah.
to be able to put together and take it to market. So time to market is something which which I see you could leverage from that. But yet again, it's got to be choose the right tool for the right job. For me, that's super important. Ensuring that is this the right tool for the job? If it is, it is. If it's not, let's have a discussion around what. Let's do a comparison. Let's see what benefits you get. Is time to market the only consideration here, or are there other things? Like there's more things we should get from low code, of course. I'm just in time to market as one of the key things. But if that's your key consideration, then maybe. If absolutely native differentiated experience with gamification and all of that stuff is what you are after, then maybe it's not for you.
You mentioned cloud, and I also think we're gonna see more companies make the move. But that decision to make the move to cloud, it's a decision that has to be made carefully, right? Especially when choosing a provider, because some of the providers tend to lock you in, and you choose a provider and you might be stuck with them for a while. Even with tech like Dockerization, which makes it easy to move application about. So what are some of the considerations that you think organizations need to make before making the move?
So the first one for me is thinking about whether it really, because organizations like doing this whole, they think about the lift and shift approach, right? So I've got something running on my data centers. I want to adopt cloud. I'm going to move everything to cloud.
Yeah.
The lift and shift only works if you've done a pre-analysis of what you have on your data center, whether it can be moved to cloud.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, that's one key thing is one, the versions of the application you're running, the kinds of load which you're running, can you actually move it to cloud? You might be running a version of an application which is not cloud compatible, and you're trying to lift and shift to cloud. It's going to be a disaster, right? So that's one. The second thing is you need to ensure that you design properly, because I've seen certain organizations who have prematurely gone into cloud, and then the cost has been something which they did not expect, right? Because you might have a relational database sitting in cloud which you're paying as a managed instance, right? And it can quickly build up, right? The cost. The question you should then ask is, do I really need a relational database which is a managed instance, right?
Yeah.
So being deliberate around how you're designing to move to your design to cloud is. The third thing is thinking about if you're in a situation where there's regulatory constraint and you still want to leverage cloud, what is the kind of latencies you would have? What is the approach to reducing latency? Because if you have if you have some let's say you decided to go a model where you've got microservices on cloud and you've got your core data address sitting on-prem, right? Then you need to think about every time you access your on-prem data, like how do you access it in a way that it doesn't impact the client who's on an app or who's on the website, on your internet banking website or your insurance platform website, right? So latencies can end up killing your application completely, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, cost is the consideration. Make sure that you design and then you look at what that means from a cost perspective. And then you spoke about vendor lock-in, but there's ways in which you can ensure that you do not have that, right? And the ways you ensure that you do not have that is by making sure that you're not using such niche product offering of each cloud provider, right? Let's say cloud provider is giving you something where you need to configure your application in a way that only suits them.
Yeah.
As opposed to using them to provide you with a platform or some infrastructure as a service. Like if I'm using some Kubernetes services, it does, like there is a flavor of it in each of the cloud providers. Yeah. As long as I keep them as purest Kubernetes services, right? As long as I don't start saying, okay, no, I'm going to leverage this particular element for that cloud provider, which would then tie into the Kubernetes services, which would then when you start doing that, then you are opening yourself for locking, right?
Yeah.
But if you're saying, I'm gonna think about this as if I was not actually gonna be, I might migrate from this cloud provider. When I'm deploying my application, I will deploy it and think about it from that perspective. So it comes from, what are your architectural principles you're defining, right? If your architectural principle is such that you know that there is a likelihood that you might want to move from this cloud provider, then design your system as that. If your architectural principle is, you know what, this cloud provider, we've got a partnership with them, so we want to leverage as much as possible, then by all means design for that. But you need to be clear as an organization, what is driving your what's the strategy behind your cloud migration, right? And neither of them is good or bad, right?
Yeah.
It might be you have a strategic alignment with one provider, and you get a lot of services from them, and there's not going to be a likelihood of you moving your estate to another service provider. What is the value then in trying to make it agnostic to that service provider?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I really like the part where you mentioned that when we design the applications, we must take consideration into, is what we're doing specific to this provider, and assess the risk there, that if we are doing this and it's specific to this provider, it might lock us in. So
Yeah,
you like that.
yeah. No, I mean, it's something which, like, for example, with some clients, we'll deliberately say that we'll be like, okay, but if we do this X, Y, and Z, this particular offering is only from this one cloud provider. Maybe we should just invest time and build it custom ourselves and deploy it.
Yeah.
Right. Because if that is a strategy around not being locked in, because otherwise, when you decide you want to move, you would have to undo some stuff and then build it anyways.
Brian, man, this has been really great. I do have one more question for you regarding projects that you look forward to in the future. What are some of the things that you can speak on that you're excited about looking into the future?
I'm always trying to learn new technologies. Like you spoke about low code, is something which I'm actually looking at to see how it works. So I play around with a lot of some of the low code kind of stuff. I've done a lot of stuff around certain OpenShift environments. I find that exciting.
Yeah,
it's always, every time I set it up, there's always a new learning. So I do find that pretty exciting. But the biggest thing for me is being able to release an application to an end user and see them use it. And it doesn't matter. It could be banking, it could be insurance, it could be travel, it could be, and those are things which excite me. Can I see when the sweat you have put in, can I see it being used? That is exciting. And yeah, I mean, I love projects in banking because there's always complexity in banking. There's thinking about the financial elements, thinking about your integration to the core systems, thinking about just something as simple as your electronic KYC, right?
Yeah.
So I love to dabble in the banking space. There's a lot to learn.
Right. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and yeah, I hope we get to do this sometime again for another Tech Raider.
No, for sure. Always, man.